Space is pretty scary, but not like an evil clown kind of scary. It's more like the I have no idea what's out there and it's terrifying kind of scary. There really is no way you could know of everything out there. Somewhere there could be a planet completely covered with giant venomous crabs, or worst of all, there could be a planet that plays Maroon 5 albums on repeat. Anything is possible, and Hoxxes is a great example of how things can go terribly wrong. Comprised of many biomes that contain a variety of climates and creatures, this planet is unexplainably unpleasant. From a deadly radioactive wasteland to a bog that can only be described as kinda soggy, it can get pretty tough to traverse the depths of this planet. It isn't all doom and gloom underneath the surface though. Caves filled with eye-catching crystals, clusters of bioluminescent life, massive salt structures, and unreasonably large coral make it slightly less horrific to work for Deep Rock Galactic. Everything imaginable and more is right here on Hoxxes, the good and the bad. Except for Maroon 5. Thank God there's no Maroon 5 here. That would be horrible. Hoxxes is a little unorthodox to say the least, and it houses any natural disaster you could really think of. Let's go down the list here. We got electromagnetic storms, gravity anomalies, earthquakes, sandstorms, erupting volcanoes, blizzards, and if you thought it couldn't get any worse, it's also haunted by giant exploding ghost bugs. But hey, there's a handful of redeeming qualities, one of them being the minerals below the surface. Filled to the brim with riches, DRG continues to dig Hoxxes dry despite the work environment being just a little bit unsafe. Even as new lethal life forms are discovered, the company continues to send workers down into the planet. DRG's work environment is so bad, they're even in WatchMojo.com's top 10 companies with the most OSHA violations. There's also this Forbes article titled Deep Rock Galactic hits 106 million employee deaths. So that's a cool fact to know. The primary reason they stick around the planet is the large quantity of morkite, cleverly named after the Danish word for darkness. Morkite is a fancy-looking dark teal mineral that can be mined or extracted from wells, and it makes the big bucks. Besides the plethora of profitable resources, there are spectacular sights scattered throughout each biome. The previously mentioned massive crystal structures, expansive ice caverns, and many forms of subterranean plant life brighten up the often unwelcoming hollows of Hoxxes. Not every living thing down there is out for blood either. Passive creatures reside in regions that best fit their needs, and they'll often cross paths with a team of miners. It's always nice to meet something that doesn't actively try to murder you. Currently, there are 10 continents to dive into, excluding the tutorial region's shallow grotto. Each of them contain all sorts of crucial differences to be conscious of. As an experienced employee of DRG, please send help, I've played way too much of this game. I thought it would be pretty fun to run through the regions in the game and briefly cover the pros and cons of each of them, and also go over some of my personal opinions. As of making this video, Azure Weald has just been introduced. The name essentially means blue forest, which is definitely an accurate description. Reminiscent of a bottomless sea, this dark biome contains fields of bioluminescent life that glimmer through the dense, cool fog. This is the prettiest biome in Deep Rock by far. I love the colors and how densely packed the plant life is. I feel like I'm exploring the darkest depths of Abzu or something. The deep blues and purples, new cave shapes, and unique creatures are just so many new cool things for one biome. Also, all of the new voice lines for the new plants and things in this biome is ridiculous. I love the amount of effort put into this. It is so cool. Looks aren't everything this biome has to offer either. Being able to hang glide on cave angels is something I can't believe is actually in the game still. There are not many things that bring me joy, but watching a dwarf hang glide is definitely one of those things. Something similarly enjoyable is the Comba Bud. This thing has a large amount of funny potential, and it needs to be capitalized on. They're gonna invent like a new sport called like Comba Ball or something. I don't know, I'm very excited about it. I can't really think of any cons for this biome, other than maybe it's kind of hard to see sometimes with all the foliage and stuff. Yeah, it's just a really good biome, and I'm really excited to see all of the new cave shapes when I dig deeper into it. The well-titled crystalline caverns are densely packed with large crystals ranging from purple to green. Smaller blue crystals are scattered throughout the claustrophobic tunnels, providing pleasant natural light. But make sure you don't get those mixed up with electrocrystals, which are considerably less pleasant to discover. These create arcs of lightning that, believe it or not, really hurt. While not as life-threatening as being electrocuted, I think I'd rather encounter these electric crystals than wall eyes. Why are there eyes in the wall? Like, who did this? How does this even, like, happen? Why is this wall filled with eyes? Compared to other regions, Crystalline Caverns has less things trying to kill you, so that's a plus. The color palette is really nice, and the variance in scale creates some interesting terrain. Sometimes you can get tunnels that are really small, and if you don't have a driller, you just gotta clown your way out of that scenario. Speaking of the terrain, it does take 3 hits to break in this biome, which is kinda lame, but it's not a deal breaker. A similarly pretty biome would be Dense Biozone. Colorful and expansive caves filled with lots of plant life, this place feels like exploring an underground alien forest. Sadly, most of the plant life here just hurts you. Exploding plants can pack quite a punch and take a significant chunk of your health, while ejector cacti, cave urchins, and trapatactus chip away at your shield. Also, who at Ghost Ship named it Trapatactus? It took me way too long to figure out how to pronounce Trapatactus. You could have just called it Mean Spike Plant, or like Evil Guy, I don't know. Some of the plant life isn't painful to encounter or pronounce. Elevator plants can sometimes be handy for moving around, as the terrain in this region does get really difficult to traverse compared to others. Glowlits provide a small amount of natural light, and cave coral is just really big and cool, and I like it. That's my deep analysis on the cave coral. Nadicite shockers and passive cave cruisers roam around this biome, and there's huge fields of glyphid eggs. I wouldn't recommend opening those. They remind me of that one scene in Alien where the guy goes in the big egg room like a dumb boy. This was my favorite biome in Deep Rock when I first started playing the game. It's one of the most visually impressive, but it can be really difficult to traverse at times. One weird thing I know, because I have played this game for like too long, the player digs larger holes in the main terrain material of Dense Biozone than other biomes. I literally have no clue why this is the case, because I've never heard anyone else talk about this, but it's honestly one of my favorite features of the biome. On the complete opposite side of the fun spectrum, we have fungus bogs. Winning the award for the smelliest region on the planet, these swamp-like caverns are filled with large tree roots, steam geysers, and xenofungi in diverse shapes and sizes. From typical mushrooms to some really funky ones. This is the perfect place for a fungi fanatic. Also, if you ping this one specific mushroom, your dwarf will say mushroom. Similar to Dense Biozone, this region also houses exploding plants and glyphid eggs, but it also has a few unshared threats. These fungi here release poisonous vapors, and I hate them very much for it. Luckily, if you're playing Driller and you have axes equipped, they basically act like a fungi lawnmower. I don't remember who told me this on a stream one time, but thank you. Thank you for that. Fungus bogs is kind of a mess to traverse. It's really hard to see with all the low-hanging vines and dark green fog filling the caves. There's a lot of patches of sticky goo that make it even worse. I feel like a slow little slug man walking around in the goop zone. You know it's bad when management even says we're almost sorry to send employees here? It may be one of the most frustrating to traverse, but Fungus Bogs isn't too bad. It's just filled with some mold and goo and mud and poison. Okay, yeah, it's pretty bad. If you're looking for a biome with better sights, look no further than Glacial Strata. Made up of blue reflective ice and snow, this is basically a winter wonderland on hoxxes. Due to the cold temperatures though, Miners will have to be cautious and make sure they don't freeze through. Vents of cold wind and blizzards can turn you into a dwarf-shaped ice cube, and you really don't want that. Some of the bugs in this region have also mutated to resist the cold, and they use it against you too. I really don't like the frost bombers, they're very annoying. Luckily, there are patches of red vegetation growing around heat vents, and those can help you warm up again. That isn't the only useful flora to look out for either. Cryofoamers create a platform when they're damaged, and it can actually be really handy sometimes. Deep snow is another good tool for reducing fall damage, but it also slows you down when you're walking on it, so keep that in mind. When I first started playing the game, Glacial Strata was probably one of my least favorite, but the more time I spend in it, the more it grows on me. A lot of the hazards just lower your movement speed, which I guess is kind of annoying, but I'd rather that than they directly damage me. Even some of the enemies that are more concerning in other biomes, like Praetorians or something, are a lot easier to deal with in this biome. That and most of the caves are just really cool to look at. I love the reflective ice when you throw a flare through a tunnel and stuff. I just love how it looks so much. The other biome that was added in Update 33 was Hollow Bough, and I'm really excited to talk about this one. This continent is made up of a giant hollow tree, and it's being attacked by hostile red vine-like plants. The style of this biome is seriously unlike anything else in the game. I think one of the biggest differences to notice from the other biomes is the caverns have folds and root-like shapes in them. It's really easy to notice in the tunnels, and it perfectly gets that hollow tree look. I think it's pretty obvious, but the hazard in this biome is these red invasive vines, and it's a really cool use of the pipe tech. I love the sounds they make when you hit them, it's just freaky. If you thought the normal red vines weren't freaky enough, they gave some of them knives. There's also quite a few wasp hives that spawn here, and they spawn more often than the Deep Tora honeycombs, so keep your eye out for those. Along with that, there's some new goo plants, and I was kind of worried about these, but they are honestly more of a support tool in these caves than a hazards. And I think this is the first time that the goo stuff is genuinely more useful to the player than it is harmful. And I'm really glad to see that. I can imagine these being extremely powerful for really tough swarms and dreadnought fights. This biome took me by surprise. I am so glad they scrapped Caustic Mire for this. It looks and sounds exactly how it should, and I'm so excited to keep exploring deeper and find all the new things that I haven't seen yet. I'd say the only thing I don't really like is the corpse feeders. They're so gross, and they just spawn so many of them in a small location, and they're all just wailing around. I don't like them. They're so yucky looking. This biome was such a big surprise to me. I thought Azure Weald was gonna be way cooler than this, but these two are both fantastic in their own really unique ways. So yeah, I love this biome. This is one of my favorites in the game now. I don't think there's any biome that's more infamous than Magma Core. This is the deepest mining site on the planet, sitting at a comfortable 250 to 400 degrees. Most of the hazards here are not a great idea to get anywhere near, as almost all of them just set you on fire. Volcanoes, fire vents, explosive plants, earthquakes, and patches of hot rocks. If you love being on fire, Magma Core is basically a choose-your-own-adventure book of options. I don't actually mind the hot rocks though. They increase your movement speed, which is useful sometimes if you're willing to sacrifice some shield to get away from some bugs. Magma Core is definitely the least favorite for most players. There's a lot of environmental damage and frequent earthquakes that are really frustrating, but once you add on the 3-hit terrain and difficult cave shapes, it does become the least pleasant biome to deal with in the game. While not as unwelcoming as Magma Core, Radioactive Exclusion Zone is also pretty tough. This biome consists of grayscale terrain covered in green glowing uranium crystals. Oh, and the radiation in this biome has mutated the creatures that reside here. Radioactive exploders and Praetorians are probably the ones you want to be most aware of. The Praetorians are really fast and deal a lot more damage. Seriously, if you're doing a mission here, remember that the Praetorians are much worse to deal with. In contrast, the plant life in this ashy wasteland is actually really friendly and unique. Cave vines swing from the ceiling and greet you when you walk by, and breathers just sit there and breathe, which is a very relatable existence. I don't really know why, but this biome's one of my favorites, and I'm definitely alone in that opinion. It's mostly due to the colors. I really like that it's all grayscale other than these bright green glowing crystals, and even the crafting materials fit in with that style. I get why people think the uranium crystals can be frustrating, but they're so easy to break and they look so neat. Oh, and this biome has 3-hit terrain. But hey, it looks cool, so it's fine. Before update 33, I think Salt Pits was probably my favorite biome in the game, and that's because I think the history of it is pretty cool. This region used to be a massive underground lake that dried up centuries ago. What remains is a system of caves filled with unique deposits of white and red salt, which apparently taste good on glyphid omelets. This biome does house the shellback's young that do literally nothing other than roll into you, making them simultaneously really annoying and stupid. But that doesn't stop me from enjoying the concept of exploring the remains of a dried up lake. I think it's super neat, and the colors and cave shapes make it way more interesting. There's a lot of really cool salt structures you can find that are unlike anything else in the game. The last biome to talk about is Sandblasted Corridors, and it's just okay. The one-hit terrain is really the highlight of this place, and it has a lot of really unique, vast open caverns. This definitely comes at a cost though. Minerals and secondary objectives can be on these large flat walls that are really difficult to reach without a scout on the team. These caves are pretty empty and desolate, with some fossils and rocks being the most you'll really come across while here. Sandstorms and wind tunnels are probably the worst of the hazards in the biome. Trawlers are pretty difficult to deal with sometimes, and the swarms of bees are kind of annoying. Obviously, since it's a desert, there isn't much for plant life here, with explosive spores being the only plant exclusive to this region. For the most part, I don't mind doing missions here, but for some reason, point extractions just end up being complete disasters. I don't know why, but the game just goes funny mode, and it can get really hard to move a quarks with how vertical these caves can get. Alright, that's all the biomes currently in the game, including the 2 new ones in Update 33. The main takeaway from looking at all of these biomes briefly is diversity. When designing a procedurally generated game, it's essential to make the experience feel unique each time. Which, from my perspective, as someone who hasn't designed a video game, that seems super hard. I can't even imagine trying to make a procedurally generated game that stays fun for more than like a couple hours. DRG makes these experiences in countless ways, but one of the largest parts is the biomes. Imagine an alternate universe where Deep Rock Galactic releases on Steam and you exclusively mine in magma core. Yeah, the core gameplay is still there and it's just as solid, but in the end it would get so boring playing in the same location mission after mission. With the setting of this game, the devs can go wild with the environments. Hollow Bow is a great example of that. That being said though, they're pretty self-aware of the absurdities on hoxxes. With the nearly limitless amount of options they had, they definitely implemented every hazard imaginable, and these change up the gameplay in all sorts of ways. A large portion of them affect how you traverse. Earthquakes and unstable ice can open up giant holes in the ground to fall in, and if you're Gunner, it's a real disaster trying to get out of those. Wind tunnels send dwarves flying or freeze them depending on the biome, or things can get weirder with Hollow Bow's vines. But not all of them change how you traverse a level in a negative way. The low gravity vents in Azure Weald are a great example of a positive way to impact moving around a cave. The devs try to implement these ways to traverse the level at any step of the road. Adding the ability for procedural terrain to affect the gameplay and the player in a meaningful way is really important. As a player, being aware of what could benefit you in getting around the level adds a new layer of depth to exploring, and it makes it way more interesting to do this repeatedly. Biomes can also affect things outside of the caves. One of these would be choosing your loadout. There's all sorts of perks in the game, and in general, they all are pretty multi-purpose, but in some cases they work better or worse depending on what biome you're in. If you're in Glacial Strata, Unstoppable is a better choice because literally everything there slows you down. If you're going to Magma Core, it probably isn't a good idea to use Beastmaster, since there's fire and explosives everywhere, and Steve just walks into anything that causes pain. Instead, it might be better to bring Shield Link, since your shield takes a lot of chip damage there. Outside of the perks, some of the beers are more useful in certain biomes. Rocky Mountain is fantastic for Magma Core or Radioactive Exclusion Zone, but you'd never buy it for a mission in Sandblasted. These things might seem small, but they all add together to make things a lot more unique. I'd say there's even smaller things that I want to talk about. Some biomes have specific ambient noises that stand out to me as really cool, like Radioactive Exclusion Zone having a faint humming throughout the caves, or Hollow Bough creaking and twisting as vines move around through it. And here's a bunch of other smaller little details I wanted to bring up in the video, but I didn't have much to say about. No matter what game you're playing, if the environment you play in gets samey and generic, it's gonna be really boring. And if it isn't fun, why bother? DRG's biomes are all dynamic in many ways. Obviously, yeah, they all look different, but also what resides in those caves. In one moment, I could be climbing around in a bunch of goop, and later I could be in a big tree, being stabbed by vines that hold knives. All of these things on screen are what I would consider important ingredients in baking these regions. Very early in development, it was planned that you would go to multiple planets and moons, but the team decided against that. This was mostly because the developers believed that one planet could hold enough variety, but this decision had a lot more positive effects to the game. From a gameplay standpoint, it makes things way more interesting. One planet with 10 biomes feels a lot more varied and interesting than multiple planets spreading those handful of regions across space. Thematically, it's perfect for the game too. No matter what, these dwarves are still stuck working on Hoxxes, a planet where anything can kill you. A long fall, being crushed by a supply pod, or a robot literally created by the company you work for. It's all jam-packed into this singular planet, amplifying how absurd it is that a company like Deep Rock Galactic can exist and profit. It may be terrible, deadly, and horrifying, but I don't think I'd want Hoxxes to be any other way. Thanks for watching. Rockin' Stone. Oh, I can't wait to do this mining mission in Crystalline Caverns. It's been a while since I did one here. Oh, look at that. Bam, I landed. What? What's that music? What? I've never heard that before. No, it's Maroon 5. How did they get here? How are they on Hoxxes? How did they get here? How are they here? I hate them. Get them off the planet. Get them off. Stop playing the music. Stop playing it. How are you even playing the music? How are you even, you're just sitting there. You're just sitting there on the ground, smiling. Are you just playing it with your minds? Are you just playing music with your mind?